Anthony, any thoughts on that? Oh.
Just how slow, I mean, culture changes a lot faster now I think because of the internet and because of how rapidly information and ideas can propagate. But culture is one of the slowest things to change, even beyond infrastructure. And I remember having this conversation with my brother a lot earlier. You know, when I was in my earlier 20s, wanting to change the world a lot more than I do now. um, I thought of it as a less daunting task, and we kind of looked at the sort of the logistics behind changing an entire culture. And again, there are more variables in changing culture than there are in studying movement, I feel like. And this is an idea that I think, I love this idea of, again, having the heroes be the sort of the representatives of change, because fundamentally, when you have people who represent, this is, you know, this is a tale as old as time, where celebrity endorsement was used to promote like things like Coca-Cola. Well, could it be used to promote things like moving better, or like treating people like human beings when they're on a hospital bed? Right, something as simple as that. I think the answer is an obvious yes, but culture is one of these things that is slow to change, and I think there has to be an almost. It's funny because, like you said, the eagerness to try and change institutional structures and like go after and dismantle, like the dismantling idea won't work fundamentally, because it's almost like taking a shaky
Well,
Jenga brick out. And just hear me out on this
sorry,
second,
sorry, go on.
just for a second. um it, that approach, it's funny because, like, on one hand, there is a propensity for human beings to focus more on negativity and to pay more attention to negativity, but on the other hand, it's easier to bring up more opposition. And I think of, you know, like with the example of Derek, who, rather than going after, it's like, oh, all these doctors are saying that you shouldn't take steroids, so I'm going to go after doctors and I'm going to go after the medical system. He's just like, hey, look, I'm doing this anyway, so I'm going to talk about it. Right. And I think we need a lot more people who are doing things like that, rather than going after and saying, hey, here's this institution and here are all the things wrong with it, and we're going to take it apart and we're going to change it. And this idea that we're going to rip down this system, that, yeah, it feels like a wobbly Jenga piece that's going to topple the whole tower, because you can't really do that because of how many other factors, how many other variables are kind of tied into it. You almost need to take that approach of, you know, developing your own community, developing a sort of conglomerate of ideas that might be counter. It's the parallel societies idea, actually, that Will introduced me to recently, where when you can't actually change something from within the system because the system itself is so oppressive, that you have to develop your own parallel society to kind of coexist along with it until the momentum from the ideas expand
Yes,
to
there you
the
go.
degree that it overtakes an old system that's sort of decaying by its own accord regardless.
Hmm. It's like Christianity in Rome. Like you
Mm.
look at what happened there, and you had Rome, old institutions, old paganism, thousands of years, well, 1,000 years old, and Rome, quote unquote, fell, but Christianity swooped in, this new culture, and just basically it was almost like Rome was the skeleton. So all those institutions were there, and Christianity swooped in and gave it a new flesh, gave it a new spirit. And so Christianity now is the weirdest thing to look at ever, because it was like, you know, a religion from the Far East, but like it uses all Roman words, like the Roman Catholic Church. Catholic, you know, it's written in Greek. It's now translated in Latin for many years. The Pope's name is Pontifex Maximus. Like this is what the Protestants got all mad about. They're like, "What the fuck? This isn't Christianity. It's not what's in the book. This is just some fucking bullshit you made up down there in Italy." Is mad jokes. Go back to
Yeah.
eating pizza and drinking espresso. They probably weren't doing that at that point, but this type of thing. Um. So yeah, like these, like in some sense, it's like unstoppable force meets a movable object. Like the innovation is going to not be able to destroy the old institutions. And actually, you should be very conscious of this. The pioneers, the rebels need to be very conscious of this. To give you actually a very prescient example is how confusing and funny this stuff is in practice, because the French Revolution is a load of guys, the Enlightenment, they theorize equality, fraternity, and liberalism. They create the paradigm that we live in politically now. They come up with the concept of democracy and nationalism. There's something for you guys to look up at. Nationalism used to be a left-wing position to rebel against the conservative church and king. That's a very interesting one, isn't it? Anyway, they come up with this concept, and the people get inspired by this. And these innovators say we need to pull down the old church institutions and the king. We need to pull this stuff down, and we need to change culture. And it's all these same ideas, the same energy. It's like the institutions are wrong. They're stuck. They're obsessing about, you know, procedure. The church brainwashes people. There's no truth left in it. And we hear that and we're like, yeah, there's corruption in the church. There's corruption in the kings. Everybody's like, oh, having a king is bad and all this type of stuff. But of course, we push out what was good about it. It was stable. It was well constituted, well put together. It had built France. France was doing very well. France was the most populous place in Europe at the time, the wealthiest place in Europe at the time, all these type of things. But nonetheless, people gave out about it. They wanted to change the system. And of course, the way they want to change the system is completely rip it down and build it from scratch the right way, with new values, with the equal values. So what do? Well, actually, this works. They do succeed in dismantling the system and changing culture. And all of a sudden, what happens is when they get the opportunity to do what they need to do, we very quickly start to realize that it's not as pretty as we were told. Everybody has this bright idea about them being the hero, but when they start to get power and they start to actually take out the institution, you start to see that they're as flawed as the people running this shit. And so what happened in France? The reign of terror. You had people in France living in fear because someone could kick down your door, just like the communists could kick down your door and cut your fucking head off any fucking moment because you weren't enough of a revolutionary. You had a Robespierre, who was a little resentful madman who just used to sit there in a hall and people march people in and be like, off with his head, off with his head. He turned into the tyrant king that he was complaining about. You know, he turned into that type of thing. He got killed, and then who shows up? Napoleon. Now, what does Napoleon do? Like all these funny things started to happen in the institutions. They had to create hierarchies of equality. There was no, everybody was a Frenchman, everybody was a comrade. There were no kings, there were none of this stuff. But what does Napoleon do? Napoleon comes back and he gets elected emperor because the people fall in love with him so much, because he establishes old institutions and order. Napoleon brings back the church. Napoleon walks into the army, and the second all these European armies are going to we're going to destroy France, they had this rule where they banished rank from the army because they wanted to overthrow the institution of rank and hierarchy. But the second real reality came in, they all turned around. They said, this is so stupid. Like, we need generals in an army. Like, what are we doing? So Napoleon comes in and he comes up with this bullshit. And he calls them marshals. And we use this to this day, marshal. And this is the idea of a general, you know, it's an idea of a kind of leader. And so, you know, big ideas clash against reality. And very interestingly, they start to very quickly morph back into rigid, frigid institutions and hierarchies and stuff like this. This is sort of the way this type of stuff works. And so we have these revolutionary spirits inside of us that want to transform the medical system and all this type of stuff. And I think a lot of it's true, but at the same time, we have to realize that, like, it's so much more sophisticated and complicated than we think. And I'd say if we went for it, you know, God knows what could fucking happen. And there might be more intelligent strategies. There might be better ways of doing this. There might be ways of going about it that are more pernicious. And actually what I see happening is it's almost like they're dissolving at the moment. Like, I see the medical institutions, I see all this type of stuff, and they're getting discredited from all sides. You have the pharmaceutical side, you have the body positive movement side, like basically what you guys are up to, like, you know, the actual feeling of health in the body and the fact that people are like living sedentary lives. In my game, there's an awful lot of people now complaining about therapy. Therapy is just complete nonsense at this point. Doesn't even make any sense. But then, like, in the realm of politics is the same. Everybody's losing the credit there. It's all just starting to go against them. And it's almost like they're actually they're dissolving and wasting away as it is. And the culture is attacking them and it hates them. And this is more fiery than I've ever seen it be. And there's a couple of ways that this can turn out. Like, either there will be some type of transformation, or it's going to reach a critical mass. And there's going to be revolution. There's going to be French Revolution, Communist Revolution, you know, Nazi fascism, Mussolini fascism. Something that big is going to come and flip over the whole schema, and all of these ideas will burst out at once, and people will try to reform this stuff. And that's one way it could go. Maybe it'll be a slower way, I'm not too sure, but I see an awful lot of that energy building up.
I agree with that, right? Like, I think that we're at that point where I think it is really just the internet age, right? The information's flowing too fast. The institutions can't keep up, so they're going to have to reform their models to be able to keep up. Or people are just going to keep sharing their information. It's just going to happen anyway. And the trust in the authority, where is it going to lie? I don't know, right? So,
yeah. It's like Protestant Revolution is another great example of this type of thing. Like when Luther came in and said, I'm going to read the book myself. Very similar to what you guys are talking